Welcome to the House of Brand, where we help unleash the true potential of your brand. If you're a business owner, leader, or C-suite executive and you're ready to scale your business to new heights, you're in the right place. I'm Torey, your guide in turning your brand into a strategic advantage for your company. In each episode, we get straight to the heart of what it takes to build a brand that drives growth, that shapes culture, and fuels your marketing efforts. So let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of House of Brand. Today we have Jessi Miracle with us. Jess is our Director of Web at BrandCraft. So tell us about yourself a little bit, Jess, and also what do you do in that role?
I do pretty much anything that involves websites. Help make them become a reality, work on contracts and making sure that we're using the right kind of technology and trying out new stuff and just managing web projects and then designing and developing some of my own as well.
Cool. Also, managing some projects, like you said, that you're not even working on. I think trying to get other people to work through projects and get them done. So let's talk about today. What we want to talk about is brand to web, a discussion of content first design. And for us, I think we've matured into this kind of as an organization. Describe to me, we have an interesting story, Jess and I do, because Jess was my first employee when I started the agency. And Jess, when you joined, kind of describe to people like what our web process was during those early years, which was when? Was that 2015?
It started in 15, but I was officially hired in 16.
Okay.
What web process?
Exactly.
There was none. It was just, here, make a website, figure everything out as you go. That's pretty much it.
Right, I agree with that. So help me understand how you navigated just that. Because I think to some people out there, everyone's in a different, whether it's an agency listening or maybe a freelancer, it could even just be a business owner, but everyone's kind of in their own stage of understanding like how to build effective web properties. So what was it like then? Like what stage were we at? What would it look like? What would you do? And what was your learning curve like in those first year, let's say?
I mean, the learning curve was really huge because I graduated with a graphic design major, so web, I had a little bit of background in web. I knew HTML and how to build a very basic website in a notepad, but all of the finer details of web development I learned strictly from you. So it was more like a learn on the go, and that's exactly what it was. You taught me how to set up a website, so I figured that part out, and then you're make some pages, so I made some pages. It was really just a trial by fire, honestly, learning what we started with, WordPress and Headway. And so, which worked for me because it was a little bit more into HTML, but it really was just, here's a list of pages, make them, design them as you go. There wasn't really any kind of mock-up or anything. It was really just set everything up on WordPress and just keep going from there.
Yeah. I remember that first year, the things that probably we worked back and forth with a lot, because you had the design skills, it was a ton of CSS, because back then, so Headway is a platform kind of similar to the modern page builder, just definitely not quite as elegant. It was a much different in that it was basically building a theme as you were going.
Yeah, you needed a lot more back-end knowledge than you do with a lot of page builders now.
But I think the skill set you learned there was a lot of CSS and how to make, and now having that understanding, I think helps you design now in Webflow and with our current page builder infrastructure, is you understand what all the settings are and why they're there, and can probably be a little bit quicker. So, so that first year, I would say that first year is a very technical build approach to web designs. And so the way that we priced and the way that we looked at web design from that group was very technical. What does it technically take to build the site? And then how many hours is that? And then when a client comes to us, we're going to say, okay, this is technically what it... And honestly, back then, more clients had technical problems. They couldn't build and they couldn't do it. And that still exists today. It's not like all of a sudden everyone out there wants or even wants to take the time to build their own website. but some of the technical problems have been taken away from the modern web design process. So it's probably made it a bit more democratic and where people can get in it. Now let's take that to where we are today. So somewhere around 2015 to today in 2024, for us recording about to be 2025, and then you and I working on kind of our new process. Kind of give me like an overall, like how do you think what's the biggest differences in what we do? And obviously there's a tie to what the subject is here, but what else is there just besides content?
And I mean, I feel like we've gone through a lot of different stages to get where we are now too. Because we definitely moved, once page builders like Beaver Builder and Divi started like really entering into the field, it definitely became more of a design focus for just the entire industry, really. We spent more time on doing mock-ups and everything, making sure that the site looked really cool and that the client got a better understanding of what it would look like instead of talking more about the technicalities of stuff. And so like site design started getting really like fancy and really cool.
So then in this transition, designers could now start to build maybe more than they could before, because there was still this tendency in this transition period. One of the things that was really popular that not as many people do today is this idea of PSD to WordPress or PSD to HTML. In other words, you would mock everything up pixel perfect, and then somebody would transfer that to web, and that was the division between designer or UX designer and the builders or the technical people that built it. Was they would just take what you designed and then they would build it for you.
Yep.
And then when these page builders started to come about, now designers could do that. So they could even maybe design on the web pretty quickly and pretty easily. They were certainly not as good as they are today, back to start. Okay, so designers now are more involved, and because of that, you're saying that maybe the designs got a bit better because you could spend more time on design and less on CSS and technical things?
I think that the glass roof was definitely broken once that became a thing, because people could be like, people weren't more like limited with what they could do, because now that the entry level was like brought down further for the coding and technical part, people could be like really explore really be creative, really explore like what could be on a website, like what it could do. And like that included us too. Like we did a lot. I think that like looking back at some of the first websites that we were making, like the design, even in like 2018 and 19, like the designs that we made were definitely like, they felt less technical. They were really like, how can we make this design really cool and like really stand out? And that was like the main focus, was the design.
So in 2018 and 19, when I look back on that time period, we were charging much less than we do today. And we were probably doing it was quick, but it was good work. Like we did a lot of websites in that time period, 18 and 19, heading into 2020. And we've done a lot of websites even since then, but it was like we always had one or two or three or four going, and we were always, in the process of creating. And yeah, it was, now the good with the bad, let's talk about what you just said though, is this idea, and I'm going to talk about more the industry problems, not really what it's like to be a web designer, but the industry also opened up to now all of these people that instantly became web developers. And there's a bit always when that happens of a race to the bottom, who can do it cheapest. In other words, if I'm a business owner and I can go out now and I can hire a freelancer that says they'll do a website for me for less than $5,000, now all of a sudden I'm intrigued by that, and I'm like, well, now you're an agency and you're so there's always going to be that argument. But it did open up the industry to a group of people that didn't have to be, that didn't have to have the technical skills in full stack web development. They didn't have to know Java. They didn't even have to know CSS. They didn't have to know any of that. They could just join and come in the industry. So because of that, we as an agency then have to continue to differentiate, and we've continued to do that. And man, for the better, I think, because take us to today. So we went through original, you're learning the technical side, we're delivering on a lot of the technical side. Then we moved to this like, hey, now we have the ability to design, and page builders now are becoming a thing. And then take us to now, like what are the challenges that we found during that whole process, and maybe start bringing it into the subject of today, which is what does the process look like for us now?
Right, yeah. We definitely we didn't go all the way back to the technical. We kind of like landed more in the middle between really good design and technical design. Because we found that while it's pretty easy to make sites that are really cool, if you've got like, if you're, you're a designer first, that's the fun part, so it's easier. But that doesn't always like achieve the client's goal. And we found that we've had a lot of sites that we've made really cool and the client was really excited about them, and then they are launched and out in the world and they're just not performing or doing anything. And then they come back to us and they're like, some of them come back to us, some of them don't. But they'll be like, hey, we're not really getting anything. Like, we like Google ourselves and we don't see ourselves pop up even on the first page.
Yeah, the marketing side leaves something to be desired on some of them, yeah.
And so we kind of had to like look back at our own process and be like, what exactly are we missing here? And we found that it really was content. And so we had to like kind of shift from, like, I remember like making processes in the past and being like, all right, we have to make sure that the design's really good. We're going to do mobile first, make sure everything looks good. And now, like, within the last couple of years, I've been like, actually, we really need to focus on the foundation and the content, and we need to make sure that the site is, it's a house for the content, and it's just, we can paint it and make it really pretty, and that's still very important, but the foundation still has to work. People still have to live inside that house. So the content is really what drives the whole design.
Yeah. I think that when we started to understand that, and let me back up and talk about something you mentioned, which is I can think of a client right now that really guided us down a path of design that we just kind of followed along with. And when I say that, I don't want to make it sound like as an agency at times that we just do what the client tells us to do. We always give advice and we always say, have you considered this? And maybe you should. But ultimately, if a client wants something, a client will often get what they want, which is, no, I just want to do it this or I want to do it that way. And a client guided us down a path that then we went out and we launched and it didn't do well. And then so we kind of came back and said, can we make a few changes? And we made a few tweaks. It wasn't a major redesign. We made a few tweaks to that site and it really started performing better. And it was really about the content, which is what we're talking about. So yeah, when we talk about content, let's define what that is. Mainly we're talking about the messaging on the site. Other types of content are video and photography and stuff like that. And all of that should be effective and certainly have a performance side built in, and probably more the video should align with the content probably quite a bit. And we are getting better and better at that, like providing video on websites that backs up what the content is saying, especially with the, how many people prefer to see video over reading through it. So content, that's what we're saying. It's the written word, it's the H1s and H2s, it's the paragraphs of content. And I think in the past we would be like, hey, we're going to go start designing and mocking up. And then separately, like, hey, let's go give a project to a writer to work with the client and start writing some content. And then we'll figure out how to fit it in to the design. And now, like, talk through, like, how would we prefer to get through that? And then we can talk about, you and I who disagree slightly, on exactly how to do that. I don't know if you're coming around to my way of thinking or if I'm coming around to your way of thinking, but talk to us maybe about that initial stage of wireframing versus mock-ups, and then how do we get the content? Where's the content coming from in these initial stages?
Content and design, it's really like what came first, the chicken or the egg. And we've gone both, like we've tried both ways, and it's really difficult, because when we used to have clients like write the content, they're like, I don't know what it's going to look like, so how do I write it? And then when we give designers, like we tell them to make the design, they're like, I don't know what the content is, I don't know how to design it. So it's been really, like, it almost has to happen simultaneously, which is where I think that wireframes become really beneficial, because when you start thinking about the foundation of what that page and site should look like, you get into more the technical layout of stuff. You don't have to worry about the design. You don't have to worry about the content right then and there. You're just more focused on the overall layout of like, this is the section that needs to talk about
Yeah.
this is the section that needs to talk about this. And then you can bring that wireframe to a writer, and then you guys can work together on the kinds of content that go in each of those sections. So now the writer sees something visual. They see where they're writing, how much they should write, where it's going to go, like how it's going to work with everything else. And then when that's done and you have a wireframe that has the layout and more specific content, you can take it to a designer and they can be like, all right, now I can design within this framework that you've given me. And then when we present that to the client, they're suddenly getting like the full package. And we're more confident that it's going to not only perform, but we made it, like we were able to design it with full confidence of both the content and the design instead of one or the other.
Yeah, it puts the client and us on an even playing field of thinking about performance and content first, and not getting all excited about the design. And by the way, having a client excited about the design is, you would think, would be all a very positive thing, and typically it would be, except that if they check out at that point and like, yeah, that looks great, let's just go build it, and then they're out, and all of a sudden we're trying to figure out what content to put in there and not getting a response or not getting what we need. So, I think that the idea of, that's one thing we agree on, is the idea of doing the wireframe and removing color and removing a lot of design out of that. In fact, there's none, really. It's mainly just everyone. If you don't know what a wireframe is, I would say definitely look it up. Jess, you use Figma. Do you use Figma for that?
Yeah, we use Figma.
Yeah. And it's really just boxes with purpose and then buttons and a menu. You can kind of see the structure of the website, but you're not going to be able to read too much into it. And that's probably a good thing. I mean, I can imagine if I was trying to sell somebody a car and I brought in like a pink sports car and I put it in front of them. I was like, do you like that car? And they're like, no, I hate that car. And what they really hate is the color. They hate pink. But if you showed them the same car in black, they'd be like, yeah, I'm all about that. Like, I'll buy that car. And the consumers are just like that. We show them something, and if they don't like the look of it, they'll say, I don't like the design. Well, they didn't like the color of the button, or they didn't like another part.
Right.
So it lets
Design's
us,
still very important.
yeah. Well, and it takes the design out for this stage. And I think it allows them to say, get on our side and say, hey, now that we're going to enter design, we're going to be very intentional about how we do that, and it's going to solve this problem of performance. And a lot of times we're going from a brand exercise that we've already done. So sometimes we have that brand book and the brand, and so we kind of know the direction we're going. And that definitely makes it easier, I would think, on your part. Maybe not. Maybe it makes it more difficult, but I wouldn't say more difficult for you to do your job, but it might be more difficult to understand and make sure that we're living that brand through the web design process. Okay, Jess, so let's say that we have a meeting with a client and we show them the wireframes. And then after that, we say, okay, now we're going to move to, well, for me, I say, I want to see a mock-up now. And you say, well, you should you don't completely disagree with me on that. But you said, I don't really need at that point to go to mock-up. I've got a really good base of a wireframe with some ideas of what the content is going to be that's now being worked on by a separate part of our agency. And I can start moving into design and integrating some of that content just through our builder and how we build the website. Did I say that right? Is that what you think, or is it something different?
I mean, this is a process that it's still relatively new for us, so it's going to evolve. And I'm not like sitting in one camp and being like planting my flag and being like, I'm not moving. I want to try some things out and see what works best. And we're only going to know what works best by trying it out. So right now it would be like, I don't know if we need to do the wireframe, since it's going to be a really high fidelity wireframe. It's going to have the exact content, maybe not like super approved content that's going on the final site, but it'll be the basic feeling of it. So we already have like pretty much exactly what it's going to look like. It just doesn't have the paint on it. But if we're able to, either we have a brand style guide or the brand's already established, I don't know if we necessarily need to move straight into the mock-up. We could just bypass that phase and just start building. Whether we build out the whole site or maybe just the pages that were wireframed with the brand already applied to it, so that way the client can see it like a moving mock-up.
Yeah, some of our clients, when they're in this stage also, have already seen kind of an idea of what a site might look like. In the brand process, sometimes when we do the brandscapes, there's a little,
Yeah.
there's a mini mock-up in there that kind of shows them what a website could look like. And so they kind of have an idea. Not only that, but sometimes, not all the time, but in some of these sites, it could be as quick to design a few of the pages just on the web as
Right.
it is to use some of our mock-up tools. We can mock full high fidelity in Figma if you wanted to, right? And you have done that before. We've used XD. We've done it in XD before. Me being old school and not having any skills to use anything other than Illustrator, I do everything in Illustrator. So I would do mine in Illustrator, which people complain about. But for me, it's quick. I can quickly mock up in Illustrator, show somebody a JPEG and say, do you like the look of this? But it's not pixel perfect, and I don't care that it's pixel perfect. But you get an approval on design direction. So I can see both sides of this like make a lot of sense. Like, hey, if we can design as fast on the web as we can using a mock-up tool, just design it on the web, and if there's changes, we're happy to make some changes
Right.
as needed.
It just kind of skips out almost like just an extra step that is going to, for the client, it wouldn't really matter because they still get to see the design. But for us, it not only saves time, but we can actually we can keep the momentum of the project moving.
Yeah. Yeah, so content itself, let's dive into a bit of that. I think that the great part about talking to you about this subject is when I say you and I disagree, I think that's a good thing that we talk about things we don't always see it the same way. And I remember when we were working on our own brand, the one thing that you and I kind of went back and forth a little bit is you're like, there's too much content on this homepage. There's too many words. And I'm like, well, there has to be words. Like that's what that, and for me, it was like, I was hearing what you were saying is, do you think someone's just going to land here and like read every word on this homepage? And I was like, well, no, but they might. And what I was thinking was, they might not read that first section, and they might not read the second, but they might read the third. Or they might not read the third or the second, but they might read the home. I just wanted every section to say something meaningful. But at the same time, I had to understand, how much of this content are people really reading? How do we strike that balance between, because what nobody wants is to open a page that has 2,000 words on it with no design. You're like, oh my word, I just got to read.
Just paragraphs.
Just
and
paragraphs of text. And you're like, okay, that's not cool. Like, nobody wants that. I keep hearing about our attention spans being lower. That could be true. I think that our attention spans maybe are more directed by things we want to pay attention to in the modern world. There's so many things we can look at, so many things we can do. So many different ways we can consume content that I think that we're very picky about how much time we spend on things that we really don't want to engage with. But if we want to, and I think if looking at our clients and our websites and content, I think the customer will pay and will read through when they're highly engaged. When they care, they're going to read through it. But the trick, I would say, that we have to balance on the content side is giving them enough really great pieces of messaging that are easy to read and consume, typically H1 and H2, giving them those early and often, and then letting them find their way through the rest of the content on the web. Do you think that's hard as a designer to try and understand like what those best like H1s and H2s? There are times where you're not exactly getting that from the writer. Some of our writers do a pretty good job of that. Like, hey, here's an H1, here's an H2, and here's the content. Sometimes, though, I think there's some really great messaging that we might pull out into an H1 or an H2. So how do you balance that, like as a designer and reading you're not necessarily a content expert, but you've probably become one in some ways just because of how much you have to use it in design.
Yeah, I think that content is probably one of the hardest things, probably in most industries that have to deal with content. Because it's like the Goldilocks situation. Like it has to be just right, or people won't read it, or you're not giving them enough information. So you literally have to balance the right amount, and it's really hard to decide what that is because it can change depending on the industry, the product, whatever. So it's really, especially for like an agency, like it's hard because you have a lot of different clientele that come through. So you have to, every time it's going to be a different Goldilocks zone of necessary content. So I think that it's probably one of the more difficult things for anybody to really manage.
Yeah, Jess, I think a lot of the things you talked about are so important. It brings back actually a lot of memories about projects. And when I say this, I don't want to act that there's a lot of failures like within our agency, but there's always challenges with every project. And you look back and, it's probably like anything else you do in life. You might look back and go, man, if I could do that again, it's like every round of golf I ever play. It's like,
Yeah.
if I could just go do that again, I would do this and this different.
It's all learning. You learn from everything.
Yeah, you learn from it. But I would say that with some of the failures that we've had, and failures for us could mean anything from we wished it could have been better, or maybe it didn't perform as well when it launched. The content was often a big part of that. Oh, I'll mention another failure as on the agency side is, and I don't want to throw clients under the bus, but this is just a habit they have that we all know as designers and as people trying to sell in the industry, that they're going to say, oh, we can write content. Like every client starts with that. And they have a really hard time paying for some reason. I think when someone's a good visual designer, the client wants a part of that. And they're like, oh, we trust you. We can see the designs you guys have done. We trust you to be, and we like you guys, so we're going to pick you to be design. And for some reason, they have a harder time, part of the less experienced marketers have a harder time seeing the value in that great written content. And so it ends up being one of the last things they're willing to pay for, which is unfortunate. But when it comes to writing content, and maybe somebody right now is maybe they're an agency freelancer, maybe they're a company looking and they're going through a rebrand, and they're like, man, this means that we're going to have to create a new website. Do you think there's ways that we can help them maybe prepare, or maybe talk about how we deal with content? For example, you're not the one writing the content, right? So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with content? How do we deal with companies that come to us and they want a website, but they think they want to write the content, but really they shouldn't, and then we convince them not to?
Yeah. Unfortunately, you really just have to eat the frog. Like, you have to get a lot of that really difficult, complicated, busy work done up front, which honestly, like the last couple times that we've done it, it's made the latter half of the projects way more fun because that's just all the designing. And you don't even have to worry about all the stuff that you weren't sure about before because it's already done. But like figuring out, starting with a really good information architecture is really important. It really is the basis of everything. And then from there, like figuring out all of the pages that you want, that you think you need, and then creating a content plan or map for each of those pages so that like really just making sure that you know what kind of content you want, what the goal is for these pages. That way, when you like start really going into it and like figuring out what kind of content's going to go in there, you already have a guide. You already have like a goal for each of these pages, and that makes it a lot easier to go through it instead of just looking at it and being like, I have like 30 plus pages that I have to write content for. Like that's like even thinking about that is like way too overwhelming. You really have to like cut it down into bite-sized pieces and work through each of those and just set it up so that the next stage is easier because of what you've done in the previous stage.
Yeah, I think as a small change that we've done as we write content and review content, is that we have a section above the written content that basically is what is the goal of this page. It might even have some SEO technical stuff in there too about URL and stuff like that. But really that one is what are we trying to accomplish? I'll give an example on our website, BrandCraft, the page that's our approach. We have a page that discusses what our approach is. And I remember in the goal of that and writing that, the goal wasn't to convert somebody at that stage. The goal was almost to walk them through homepage. I want you to understand who we are. I want you to understand our position and who we serve and what we do. Then when they go to our approach, I want them they're now middle of the funnel. I want them to be educated that we have a process and we have a way of doing this that's different than what others do. But it's not until that third page that they might hit that we're really asking them to convert and do something. That doesn't mean, by the way, because we built that funnel, that we haven't given them opportunities on all pages to contact us and convert.
Right.
that's just not our expectation, and that's not what we're writing for, is to get them to convert. We're not asking them to do something. We're still educating. And I think it's important to say, well, of course you would know what to write on our approach. Just write your approach. Be like, well, on the face of it, that's exactly right. We're going to write about our approach. But there's still ways to guide them down a path of, okay, I understand like how you work as an agency, and there are nuances in that and how you write it and what you do. Our writers, you'd say, what are the challenges that we've had with content? And I ask that honestly as a question because I don't think I know them all. I just know that I've heard things in the agency of, there's way too much content, or this client isn't giving us content. Like, what are the challenges we have as we get through a project when it comes to this? Even now, but better now because we have writers that help us. But what are ones that we've seen throughout the years?
Yeah, I think the biggest one that probably most agencies and even freelancers can attest to is getting information from a client or from a writer. It's a lot of work. So especially if we're expecting it from the client, like they've got a lot of other stuff that they're doing. So this isn't like, especially if they're like a smaller company, it's not a huge priority for them because they're running their business. And they've got a lot of stuff that they need to do and take care of, so the content kind of falls through the cracks. Mm-hmm. And then we can't really do a lot without that content. So, or when we do, we'll skip past a very vital point and like design for it. And then when we finally get the content, it doesn't fit the design anymore. So then we have to redesign it to fit the content. Which leads into another thing is a lot of people don't understand how content is supposed to be on the web. Mm-hmm. So we'll get huge paragraphs, an entire story on a page that's supposed to be maybe like a couple paragraphs at most.
Yeah, I think that's that's somewhere where people can get help. Whether you're a business owner, even other agencies out there that might be watching this, is to challenge someone to say something that's more succinct. Can you say that in a shorter way that's just as effective as all those words you just used to say that? That is definitely a problem for people that have low experience writing content based on usability and user experience. Is we need to tell them everything about everything in our company and how we do it and why it's better. And it's just we. We're going to talk about us, we're going to talk about what we do, and we're going to just keep talking about that over and over. And we've come to realize that really what you need to write is to the consumer and solve their problems. Mm-hmm. We do this to make you feel this way. We do this so that we solve this problem for you. And when you can start to unlock that, and we another part that we do to get that is in brand, it starts to uncover these reasons that you solve problems for customers in our process that we use for brand. So now we've started to use some content delivery in our brand books that informs maybe the homepage and some of that main messaging. And I think that's worked really good. It hasn't been flawless because sometimes it just doesn't always necessarily translate perfectly, but we're getting better at it. And I think that content is getting much better. That is, definitely more strategic. Allows maybe the design team and others to read through that brand guide, come up with some quick ideas and put it in a website and in a way that makes sense. So, more performance oriented is the ultimate goal. And that's why this idea of us going content first, we think is a better performing website ultimately, right?
Mm-hmm. And just a better, more fun for, the designers to go through the process, but also for the client. And if we're all enjoying the process and it's less stressful, there's less things that you have to worry about, it's going to just go smoother. Mm-hmm. That's just how it goes. Smooth is fast. That's how it goes.
Yeah. There's maybe two different terms to talk about this next subject, which is it expensive or is it costly? And I think when I hear the term expensive, to me that means if I go to this restaurant and this other restaurant, one of them has good pricing and one of them is expensive, it means I'm kind of getting the same thing, but one of them is expensive. Sometimes things are more costly, though, because you're getting more from it. And so I would say this process is definitely more costly than what we were doing 8 years ago. There's more people involved. There's more strategy involved. There's more pre-planning involved. And, of course, there's wireframes. And then sometimes there is still mock-ups and then build. Why do you think that those extra costs, I guess, how would you justify it when you talk to somebody about it? The fact that, yeah, it could be more costly, but here's why it's still the right approach.
Yeah. The world's becoming more and more digital. Lots of people have a space in the digital world, so there's a lot of noise. And then it's going to become more important than ever to stand out against that noise. And you can do that in a lot of different ways, but being able to speak directly to your consumer and the people that you want to reach in a way that actually reaches them and resonates with them is going to become really important, because they're going to get a lot of stuff that they're like, if they're Googling something, they're going to get a lot of results. So making sure that the content really speaks to them is going to be very important. And that's going to require a lot more strategy up front on agencies' parts, but also on clients' parts as well. Like, they have to be able to understand what it takes to reach those people, and it's really going to be content.
Yeah, and I think it's worth the investment and the cost of both time and energy for those business owners and for us to do that. This is not easier. It's not easier for us to get through the client process. It's not easier for us to do it this way. It's just more effective. Mm-hmm. And it's a better marketing tool when you do it. And so we have to work harder in sales. We have to work harder during the process. We have to deal with clients that sometimes might get a little bit impatient about what it takes to get quality content done. But ultimately, it is all about performance and making sure that when you spend that money, that it should be to make something better, right, and make it perform. And we believe that this content-first approach is the way to do that. Mm-hmm. And I'm excited to see where it goes. I'm excited to see the changes that we can make. There's probably a whole nother episode that we could really dive deep into how could you walk through the content on each page. We're not going to do that today. I think we've really laid the groundwork of why content-first design matters and why we do it the way we do it. Is there anything you think that we didn't talk about, or questions that we should cover, or points that we should make on closing that we haven't talked about yet? Just
reiterating again that, like, doing this content first approach, it doesn't make the process easier, and it doesn't necessarily make it like a whole lot faster in the timeline. It just makes everything go smoothly together, but it does require a lot of upfront heavy thinking work, which, if you told me that in 2015 or even 18, I would be like, I'm just a designer. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm just here to make things look pretty and to, like, try really cool and new things on the web, like, to really stand out. So it is definitely a different approach to just web design in general, but, like, I really feel like it makes, like, we've had a lot of success in doing it already, and it makes it so much easier. You just have to really focus on getting it into bite-sized pieces so that it's more manageable.
Yeah, I feel like there's that statement early and often. It starts in sales and it goes all the way through it to, hey, just trust our process. Whatever it feels like in the middle of that process, like you're getting challenged and you don't think you have the answers, or the content is really not coming together, just trust the process. We'll get through it. Because at the end, the result is so much more satisfying, and it's so much better from a marketing perspective, that we have gained the confidence to be more of a strategic agency and to say, hey, trust our process. And that takes really everybody in the agency feeling like, I am the expert in the room on what it's going to take for this project to be successful. You're the subject matter expert, and I'm pointing to the client. You're the one that knows what you do for a living, and you know your business better than we. I'm the subject matter expert on trying to turn that into a website that performs and tells your story. And that takes confidence. Some of our clients that we work with are pretty big companies and pretty big organizations, and so we have to know our place. And I think you've grown from that designer that, was like, hey, I'm just working kind of on my own, figuring out CSS, to know, like, how we just make this come to life, to, hey, like, you should listen to us and trust our process, and as I walk you through it, you'll begin to see why it matters. All right, guys, so that wraps up our talk about a discussion of a content-first design when it comes to web. We look forward to seeing you again on the next episode of House of Brand.